You tell me when we're live, Debbie. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the North and East Plans panel. My name is Councillor Caroline Gruen, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that we're holding this meeting in a way that is COVID secure and in accordance with new social distancing guidelines, which means everyone present is appropriately spread out and has been allocated a specific seat. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the Leeds City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. The North and East Plans panel deals with applications from the North East and East of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. Before I begin, could I inform members that the 90-minute rule has been removed, but it would be good practice that if the room gets to a temperature that makes staff and visitors uncomfortable, then a welfare break may be needed to allow the room to ventilate. So if anybody gets to the point where they feel they need that, please indicate and we will just give everybody a cooling off period. It is. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone when you've once introduced yourself? And if we could start from my left, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jenna Riley, Principal Planner from the North East team.
Good afternoon, Councillor Elizabeth Nash, representing Hunslet and Riverside.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Councillor Gower Almus from Beeston and Holwick Ward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Councillor Emma Flint from Wheatwood Wood.
Good afternoon, Councillor Morel Mitchell, Kipax and Methley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Nicole Sharp from Temple Newson Ward.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Good afternoon, Ryan Platton, North East Team Leader.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Dan Cohen from the Old Woodley Ward, substituting for Councillor Ryan Stevenson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Alan Lamb, representing Wetherby Ward.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Debbie Oldham, Governance Services, Clerk to the panel.
Pippa Plumtree Valley, Principal Legal Officer and Legal Advisor to the panel today.
Hello, I'm David Newbury. I'm the Lead Planning Officer for the Plans panel.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Cohen, for substituting this afternoon. We appreciate your time and presence. Moving to the agenda, could I ask Debbie to go through items 1 to 5, please?
Chair, do you want to ask the officers just behind me?
My apologies, I have missed them. My apologies. Yeah, would the officers behind like to introduce themselves, please?
Good afternoon, it's Catherine Highways.
Tom Beavers, Fabrics Management.
Stephen Raleigh, Design Officer.
And yeah, Toby Russell, Senior Technical Officer.
Are we there? Thank you.
I'll go through agenda items 1 to 5.
Thank you, Debbie.
So under agenda item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there are no exempt items. Agenda item 3, no late items of business that I'm aware of. Agenda item 4, could I ask members to disclose any interests? I'll take silence as there are none. And agenda item 5, apologies have been received from Councillor Stevenson, and Councillor Dan Cohen is attending this meeting as his substitute. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we'll move to item 6, the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of June. Do members accept these minutes are a true and correct record? Move them. Thank you very much. And so I'll assume correct as it states here unless indicated otherwise. So could we go to, are there any matters arising, please, from the minutes? Anybody would wish to raise? And I see no indication. So we'll go straight to agenda item 7, the reserved matters application for the residential development and dwellings at Leeds Road, Collingham.
Thank you, Chair. Just to, if I could just draw members' attention to a factual error in the report. Paragraphs 12 and 13, I just want to double check and clarify the numbers. So paragraph 12, it should read 88% are detached and semi-detached, not 81. And it should read 12% are tri-terrace properties and not 19%. And at paragraph 13, it should read 45 affordable units in a mix of 24 two-bedroom semi-detached units, 6 three-bedroom semi-detached units, and 15 tri-terraced units. Okay, I'll just move on to the slide then. Next slide then, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, great, thanks. So yeah, this application seeks the determination of the reserve matters of appearance, landscaping, layout and scale in relation to an outline planning permission for a residential development of 129 units at land off Leeds Road in Collingham. Outline permission was granted in December in 2016. The inspector's decision established the principle of residential development on the site of up to 150 units, along with the detailed means of access to be taken from the A58 Leeds Road. The application is submitted by Miller Homes on behalf of Albert Hills, and it's brought to Plans Panel at the request of Harewood members who are concerned about the design and layout of the scheme in relation to the neighbourhood plan. Next slide. Oh, I'll stay on this slide, sorry. So this is in the slide, you can see the aerial photograph of the site. So it's the three fields with the A58 along is the southern boundary. To the north, you've got Harewood Road and the River Wharf beyond. To the east, you've got the Millbeck Green Estate, and beyond that, you've got the village of Collingham, the village centre, which is about 0.8 kilometres. To the west, you've got agricultural fields, which are in the green belt, and the land to the south of the A58 is also in the green belt. Along the, where it says, I don't know if you can see on the bottom of the slide, it says Collingham Beck, and there's a tree line. That's where the beck follows that path. And the trees along there are protected by a tree preservation order. The site is all parts of the site, sorry, are also in the flood zone 2 and 3, sort of along the beck at the southern part of the site. And the wider area is distinctly rural in character. Next slide, please. So this photo shows the site from the A58 looking to the eastern corner, looking north, sorry, yep, so it's the eastern part of the site. And in the bottom of the photograph, you can just see the beck. In the distance, you can see the rear of the properties on Millbeck Green on the east there, and along the north there, you've got the properties of Highcroft and Langwith Avenue. And yeah, you can just see the beck in the bottom of the picture. Next slide, please. This photo shows the western part of the site. It's taken from the access track off Harewood Road. As you can see, the land falls away slightly to the south. It's a relatively open agricultural field. In the distance, you can see the tree line boundary that I was talking about that follows the beck. And on the property you can see on the left is the side elevation of a property on Hastings Way. Next slide, please. This photograph shows the A58, so you're looking towards it in the direction of Leeds. You can see the line of trees again. They're protected by a TPO, and beyond that boundary and that fence line is the beck. You can see the footpath on one side of the road. Next slide, please. And this is taken in the other direction, so looking towards Collingham Village. It's getting more domestic and rural, not rural, sorry, it's getting more suburban. So you've got the street lights, you've got the bus stop, you've got footpaths on both sides, and the beck again on the other side of the post and rail fence. Next slide, please. This is a photograph taken from the A58 at where the access would be introduced. So I just want to reiterate that access is a matter that's already been considered by the inspector, and it's not a matter for this application. I just thought it would be useful as a bit of context for everyone. Next slide, please. This just shows a photograph of the beck, Collingham Beck, which is the bridge would go over the beck into the site. So that one I just thought was quite useful to show you the width and the kind of character of the beck, the sizes of it. Next slide, please. So this slide is really useful. This shows the site allocation, the green belt boundary, and within context of the wider village of Collingham. So the site edged in brown, that's HG 1519. That's an allocated site. It's an identified site in the site allocations plan because it has outline planning permission. The land in green is the green belt boundary. So the area in brown is not green belt, but parts of the application site are within the green belt. But the residential units will be located on the brown area that you can see in the slide. But I thought it would just be helpful just to clarify that, and you can see it in context with the wider village. Next slide, please. So this is the indicative site layout plan that the inspector considered back in 2016. As you can see, you can see the access over the Collingham Beck. You can see the tree line along the southern part of the site. It's got a circular link road, green swathes running through the centre, like a green corridor running through the centre of the site. Along the western boundary, you've got a footpath which will link Harewood Road to through the site. And this is just indicative, but this is kind of what was discussed and tabled and considered back when the outline was. Next slide, please. So this is a photograph of a section, sorry, of the bridge. So the bridge already has permission and is controlled by the outline application. We're not proposing to revisit that as part of this application. I just wanted to reiterate that point and just to give you some information about the wider outline, and today's meeting is about the detailed matters that are reserved, so I'll get on to those. Next slide, please. So this is a proposed site layout, which I think members can see the similarity between the indicative master plan discussed outline and what we've managed to kind of, well, negotiated over quite a long time now, but this is the most up-to-date revised layout we've got. And we've tried to take on board a number of comments from consultees, local residents, the parish council, as well as sticking to the sort of what was discussed at outline and delivering on that. So the bulk of the massing is set back from the beck and the A58. And it will be screened by the tree belt there. We've got large areas of open space to the south and the west. It's considered a connected layout. It's still got the circular road that runs around the site. We've got two short internal roads running in a horizontal direction, east to west. And you've got another one which adjoins the western boundary. All dwellings have driveways, cycle storage, and we're proposing to condition the electric vehicle charging points so that even the dwellings without their garages will have electric vehicle car charging points. Garage locations are to the north of the garage locations are to the north of the plots wherever possible. And the site layout has been amended numerous times during the course. Obviously, the application was submitted in 2019. We've been working with the developers, but also the members of the public and residents and internal consultees to try and get a layout that is acceptable, and this is where we've got to today. We've overall the number of units has reduced to 129, so it came in at 139. So we've lost some of the units in order to meet the minimum space and minimum distances to boundaries. We've increased the landscaping. We've increased the green corridors. The site that the layout that came in originally had lots of cul-de-sacs, and we've moved away from that in order to get a well-connected road network, so that on delivery days, bin days, there's still a good level of connectivity. All the dwellings comply with the neighbourhoods for living minimum distances. Detached properties make up about 65% of the development, semi-detached about 23%, and tri-terrace properties 12%. Within the site, we've got 45 affordable units. So that does comply with the council's policy to deliver 35% on this, and also what was agreed at outline. And we've got pedestrian and cycle connectivity through the site, and we've improved the footpaths where the green, where the formal green spaces within the site, the smaller elements, we've increased the sort of pedestrian links and connections, making that you'll be able to cut through the site as well. So not just the footpath that comes around the site, we've tried to improve on that connectivity within the site as well. Next slide, please. This plan shows the public open space. As you can see, we've got you've got three areas, three large areas really. So you've got G, which is the west area in the west. You've got H and I at the bottom. Then you've got F, which is more of a formal laid out space in yellow at the southern end of the scheme. And then within the development itself, you've got some smaller areas. So discounting the smaller areas because of their size will, if you consider F, area F, H and I, that does comply with the green space requirement that was attached to outline. The area identified as G is a large area. There's a significant over provision of open space on this site. That area is in the green belt. It's also in the functional floodplain, so that's a functional area of open space. So it's even though the housing site itself is, you know, there's 129 houses on that area, it will be set amongst this wider area of open space, which will help give it an attractive setting. Next slide, please. So in terms of landscaping, this plan is just to show you some detail from the landscaping within the site, which we're proposing to deal with that via condition. So the plot planting and the what you'll see on the trees on the road, sorry, the trees on the roads, plot planting, general landscaping, we're proposing to deal with that via condition when we know more details. But the wider landscaping, this has also been enhanced following discussions with officers. So they've incorporated a wildflower meadow, bulb planting, a wetland meadow, so the functional floodplain needs to remain open so that it can act as a functional floodplain. But the wider benefits are that it will help alleviate flooding further down in Collingham. I'll come on to that in the next slide. So within the site, we've got hedgerows, soft planting, ornamental planting, up to 180 new trees will be planted, and the developers are confident they can and have agreed to meet the 3-for-1 replacement tree policy. So we feel like it will be quite an attractive development, and it's positive. Officers are also confident that we can achieve a biodiversity net gain on the site, including the enhancements to the beck, the replacement planting, and then the wildflower meadow, and all the benefits that package of landscaping will achieve. And also the developers have been engaging with the local wildlife trust as well about introducing local species back into the beck and working with natural management of the wetland area. Next slide, please. I'll just talk about the flood compensation area now. So the Environment Agency have recently updated their guidance, and they have been carrying out remodelling works in the area. The applicant has responded to these changes and has submitted a technical note. So we were due to be at panel in April, I think, and this technical note was needed. So the developers went away, and hence some of the delays in the process, as we've been trying to answer all the questions and all the points, and they've been able to go away and talk to and satisfy the Environment Agency now. So yeah, so just to reiterate a paragraph from the officer report, 22 properties on Millbeck Green would benefit from reduced flood risk, and numbers 68 to 74 Millbeck Green would no longer be at risk of the flooding in the 1 in 100 annual probability of flooding. And the further works that they've done does take into account the climate change events. So that was the driving force with the Environment Agency's advice, was to make sure they consider climate change eventualities, which they have now done. The Environment Agency are happy with the information in that technical note. Next slide, please. This slide shows the materials layout. So we've got a mix of materials proposed across the development. 63 of the units are buff reconstructed stone, and David's got some material samples to hold up for members. Yeah. And that would come with a burnt orange roof tile. 45 of the units would be a gold buff brick with a slate grey roof tile. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
There are some illustrations of our presentation which will
yeah, yeah,
representation in the whole.
yeah. So that is this slate grey roof tile. So it's slate in colour. So in terms of the roof materials, there's almost a 50-50 split on site between the orange and the grey tile. The next slide then, please. So this is a we have had the application in a long time. We have been going backwards and forwards over design to try and get to something that is an acceptable balance. And as part of that, we did a character assessment. Officers went out and we looked at various streets in Collingham, the ones immediately adjoining the site and also the wider area. So on the top left, we've got Green Lane, which shows it's a part red brick and part cream render with a slate roof. You've got the mock Tudor features and the chimneys and the gable features. Top right, you've got Millbeck Green, which is an attractive, characterful residential estate just to the east of the site. Bottom left, you've got Osprey Close, which is off Kingfisher Reach, which is a later, more modern estate. And to the right, you've got Hastings Way, which is a smaller bungalow, stone built with the red tile, and there's just I think side elevations are rendered. As you can see, quite a lot of the properties are open fronted, so there is an element of spaciousness to them. Next slide, please. So yeah, the two photos on the left are from Coverdale Garth. Again, a different house type, different character, different materials, open frontages, and the ones on the right are the Croft. Again, you've got like a reconstructed stone with dark heads, and stone heads and sills are prominent with the dark window materials. You've also got elements of cladding, and hedging is common in that estate. Different colour bricks as well. Next slide, please. And here you've got the Garth, which is closer into the centre of Collingham. Really attractive. You've got stone built properties. You've also got some rendered ones. Chimneys are prominent, tree lined, and grass verges. So next slide, please. So yeah, I'll just talk you through the house types then. So this one is the affordable. So there are 39 of this house type, which is the 2-bed affordables across the site. It's constructed out of the buff gold brick with the slate grey roof and stone heads and sills, and they'll be open fronted with parking space for 2 cars. Next slide, please. So this one is the part stone and part render. This is a 3-bedroom property. We've got the burnt orange tile, and you've got a modest canopy porch. You've got stone heads and sills and relatively simple features. And there are 6 of these in total. And house type, next slide, please. So this is a 3-bed affordable, slightly larger. You've got the canopy porches, stone heads and sills, open fronted again, constructed out of the buff brick. Next slide, please. This is house type 4. So this is a 4-bedroom stone built with the red tiled roof. The majority of the units will look like this one. Next slide, please. So this one shows the part stone and part grey rendered, part stone, sorry, and part rendered property with the grey roof. Again, you've got the canopy porch, stone heads and sills. That's a 4-bedroom version. Next slide, please. And this is the larger 3-bedroom stone property with the integral garage. You've got stone heads and sills, canopy porch. Next slide, please. Yep, again, we've got the stone heads and sills. So this again is the reconstructed stone and the burnt orange tile roof. 63 of the dwellings will be used, will be constructed using these materials. Next slide, please. So this is a street scene. The slide is not the best, but this is to give you an indicative street scene of how the development could look from the outskirts and within the development itself as well. Next slide. And here are some photos of a similar development in Bramhope, I think, that the developers have sent in this week, which have been added to the presentation just for members' benefit. It shows these stone heads and sills, and you've got the reconstructed stone and the slate canopy porches and open frontages and the grass verges. Next slide, please. And this is an example of the rendered one. So you've got the stone at the bottom, part rendered with some detailing and gable features. And in the background on this one looks to be a chimney, an integral single garage with a bit of a steep driveway. Next slide, please. So yeah, just in conclusion then, it is important to note that the outline is the starting point for members' considerations. The principle of development, including the means of access, has already been established, and a lot of the considerations that go to the heart of the matter, the heart of the development, have already been approved or are controlled by Section 106 or by condition. The development will bring forward an identified site in the housing plan, and it's a site that the council feel is ready, is right for development now. There is still a deficit in supply in terms of the delivery of housing, and this site will help contribute to that and in the district, and also relieve pressure on the Greenbelt. The Reserve Matters application is considered to meet objectives of the core strategy, including Spatial Policy 1, and deliver 129 homes in a high market area. 35% of these will be affordable units, and there's a significant over provision of open space, which is considered to be a benefit of the development. And it is acknowledged that the applicant is also going beyond what was agreed at outline in order to recognise current priorities, such as climate change. A package of measures is agreed. Minimum space standards, all the houses comply with that policy, and accessible housing as well. The development doesn't strictly meet all of H10, but they are meeting Part M of the building regs, and they're doing a lot in terms of accessibility and door widths. But just to reiterate, that wasn't controlled by the inspector at the outline, so they don't need to do anything. So what it's a positive that they're doing something in that direction. And a significant wider benefit of this scheme is the flood defences and the flood mitigation that they're carrying out, and the wider impacts that will have for Collingham, and also the introduction of the wetland area, wildflower meadows, and the bulb planting along in that area. So members are asked to consider the 4 reserve matters. So we've got appearance and scale. So the officers feel the development will create a visually attractive and interesting development with the balance between the residential units and the landscaping and the open space. Officers have worked hard to try and incorporate the views of local residents and push for improved materials. We've got the increased use of stone. We've got gable features have been introduced. much better landscaping scheme and green sways running through the site and green corridors. And the development is considered to reflect the local character, and which the gable features will give a nod to that vernacular character you see in Collingham. And in terms of landscaping, we've talked about the natural wetland and wildflower meadow, green corridors. They're meeting the 3-for-1 tree replacement policy. Approximately 180 new trees will be planted, and they're engaging with the local wildlife group. Yeah, the biodiversity net gain will be controlled via condition. And in terms of layout, the site is well screened and relates well to neighbours. It's a connected layout. Development would have an attractive setting when viewed from the west and the south. Plots comply with minimum distances, and obviously you've got the pedestrian link as well, which is an added benefit linking Harewood Road with the A58. So with the and just to add, since the report was published, we've had 4 more representations from the parish council and 3 local residents. I can quickly summarise some of these points. So some of the points are they're sort of repeating points that they've already made, and yeah, it's just so the parish council, I'll just run through it quickly. Concerns about the sight lines of the amended bridge design and the ecological assessment. Design is more dense than at outline stage. Community response is not taken on board. Significant number of objections from residents. The number of houses has increased since the outline. Bungalows are not proposed. Affordable house type is the only house type to meet the accessible housing standards. No 2 beds for people of Collingham to downsize. And they welcomed a variety of roof styles and stone heads and sills, but would push for a better quality design. And the mention about the conditions listed in the previous panel report, and we've clarified the conditions that were proposed last time, done a comparison against section 106, and we've just tidied those up in this report. So what was proposed to be controlled last time still is, but it just doesn't need to be a condition as part of this application because it's covered in the outline. A neighbour at Teed makes following comments that previous comments still stand. Density, the development is more dense than neighbouring developments. Flooding, no liaison with existing residents. Request a condition about damage to the structural stability of properties adjacent to Harewood Road. And the neighbour at number 15, design's not been improved, only just meets minimum distances, landscaping inadequate. So yeah, I think even in taking on board those comments that have been received since the report was published, on balance, officers feel that the benefits outweigh the harms in this this application. So when you list all the benefits up and you do that planning balance, officers feel like it's tipped now to recommend approval and support this. So yeah, members are asked to grant consent of the reserve matters subject to the conditions listed at the front of the report.
Thank you, Jenna. As Jenna has already pointed out, we're here today only to consider the appearance, the landscaping, the layout and the scale. We can't change anything other than those things today. And in the light of that, David's going to update us on some recent guidance that's been provided on just exactly around those issues.
Right, yes, thank you, Chair. Just to make our lives all that much more interesting, a revised version of the National Planning Policy Framework has been released, and that came forward on Tuesday afternoon. The thrust of the document very much remains the same as it was before. There's some changes in emphasis and some changes in terms of points of clarification. But in terms of today's agenda, as the Chair has alluded to, there are some pertinent points which I thought it was probably appropriate to draw your attention to. There is now within the document a very strong emphasis on the production of local design guides and local design codes. That's very much coming forward. And it says, the policy now says that planning permission should be refused where it fails to reflect those local design policies. Conversely, it also says significant weight should be given to development which reflects such policies and such design guidance. Now, that's not too different to what the previous document had to say, but if I put it into some sort of context, previously the MPPF had this phrase which we as officers use and members use frequently when talking about these sorts of schemes, and it said permission should be refused for development of poor design that fails to take opportunities available for improving the character and quality of an area and the way that it functions. And that was a key sentence that we often referred to and quoted. That's now been changed, and it says development that is not well designed should be refused, especially where it fails to reflect local design policies and government guidance on design, taking into account any local design guidance and supplementary planning documents, such as design guides and codes. Conversely, significant weight should be given to, I'll just read one of the bullet points, a relevant one, development which reflects local design policies and government guidance on design, taking into account any local design guidance and supplementary planning documents such as design guides and codes. So you can see the sort of the change of emphasis there is very much moving towards that sort of policy base and judging proposals against the policies that we have and the design guidance we have, such as neighbourhoods for living. And arguably in some ways, you know, what's set out there, what the government set out in the revised MPPF is what we're doing anyway. We've got design policies, we've got our neighbourhoods for living, and we slavishly judge proposals and refer developers back to those particular documents. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't judgments to be made, because obviously it's elements of design, there's subjective analysis of what's good, what's bad, what's important locally. So there is still, you know, there's that debate to have in and around the application. And I'm sure members will welcome this. There is also now an increased emphasis on using trees in new development, with paragraph 131 of the new document stating that planning policies and decisions should ensure that new streets are tree lined, that opportunities are taken to incorporate trees elsewhere in developments, and that existing trees are retained where possible. And then they've also revised their bit with regard to flood risk, but it's set in the context of plan making rather than decision making. And I just mention it here just simply because it reflects what's actually happened in this particular instance when we've been dealing with the outline application at appeal. And it says, with regard to planning and flood risk, local plans should use opportunities provided by new developments and improvements in green and other infrastructure to reduce the causes and impacts of flooding, making as much use as possible of natural flood management techniques as part of an integrated approach to flood risk management. So they're the changes which have come forward, and I'll highlight those because they're pertinent to the elements that we're considering today, as highlighted by Councillor Gruen. And as I say, because we have our policies such as P10 in the core strategy and neighbourhoods for living, to some extent, we're ahead of the game in that regard. Just one other point I should just mention very briefly. If we get to the position where members are minded to grant planning permission, there are a couple of additional conditions to add. One about electric charging, vehicle charging points to all properties, because the appeal decision just related that to garages. Some of these properties don't have garages. And a technical thing on highways, that visibility displays on all internal roads should be 2.4 metres by 25 metres. So we just add those two conditions to the list that we have. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we have some objectors today. We've got Councillor Holmes and Councillor Stevenson. If you're both speaking, would you like to come forward together and take up the available speaking seats, please? Can I ask, are you splitting the time between you? You are.
Well, no, I've never been at this end before. Julian's going to do the full 4 minutes, and I'm going to chip in with questions if there are any.
Press it once. All right, it's on, red light. Okay. Thank you. I've been involved in both this application and the Collingham Neighbourhood Plan since 2012. I believe I'm expertly placed to judge whether the proposals are appropriate, and I'd say they are not. Firstly, I would like to consider what's changed since the outline application was approved. The neighbourhood plan has been examined by an experienced inspector and the amended plan made. It must now be used and given material weight in the decision process. Relevant policies include items related to distinct local character, height, scale, spacing, and landscaping. The NPPF has been updated, and here it's been updated again, and includes more emphasis on good design and responding proactively with the community. Engagement by Miller Homes has been woeful, and I cannot identify a single change that's been made following requests by the parish council or the community. The applicant is obliged to demonstrate how concerns have been addressed and incorporated into proposals that comply with local design guides and the neighbourhood plan. Paragraph 130 recognises the importance of continuous improvement, and applications once approved cannot be materially diminished between time of approval and completion. This means the Reserves Matters application has to be at least as good quality as the outline application approved. This test fails on multiple counts. Slide 3 that I prepared shows the outline plan and the current proposals together. The original application had between 110 and 120 dwellings, the current 129. The design and access statement recorded a need to transition between densities on the eastern and northern boundaries. The number of plots on the northern boundaries increased from 17 to 26, with a loss of landscaping which is essential to break up the dense massing of buildings. They're also more tight to the site boundary. Your officer previously summarised, this particular layout appears cramped. The indicative layout needs improvements in a reduction in density and design terms before the scheme can be deemed acceptable. None of that's happened. It's got worse, not better. My slide 4 was from the original design and access statement, shows bungalows located on the eastern boundary. Again, your officer stated, it's likely these bungalows would not have a negative impact subject to appropriate levels. By implication, the two-storey buildings that have been replaced then must have a negative impact. This point was acknowledged by the outline inspector's assessment of the site. In relation to bungalows, the neighbourhood plan policy G is categoric. Accommodation suitable for the older demographic is a requirement. This might mean open market two-bedroom properties, bungalows or sheltered accommodation. None have been proposed. It's not just an issue for Collingham. The 2017 Strategic Housing Market Assessment paper requires 5.9% of development in Leeds to be bungalows. Are these likely to be built in the city centre? I don't think so. It means places like Collingham should receive at least 20% of their new building as bungalows. Our concerns with regards to landscape design and amenity space have simply not been addressed. Leeds landscape officers have shared these concerns and they've been ignored as well. Put simply, the flood protection measures required are exactly that. This is areas G, H and I. These are vital elements to protect existing and new residents, cannot be combined with other functions such as amenity space and landscape planting without the express agreement of all stakeholders. Nowhere in Wheatwood's report does it say flood compensation bases will be wetland habitats. They must be free draining. 1 in 4 and 1 in 6 slopes would be very low quality, unusable amenity spaces. We have to be certain the bunds are not planted. The space needed to fulfil the conditions needs to be created imaginatively. This is nothing new. Your officer previously stated, part of the public open space is proposed to be located within the green belt. This is considered to be unacceptable and could harm the openness and character of the green belt. Including the area of the attenuation tank, green space provided is only 35% of that required by the conditions. The application is contrary to planning policy, contrary to your ambitions for Leeds to be the best city, and contrary to the recently advertised Leeds local plan update. I urge you
to make your final point because you have.
Yeah, I urge you to refuse the application.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Members, are there any questions that you would like to ask our speakers? Councillor Anderson, I've seen you.
Probably more because it's something that Councillor Stevenson has said in his objection. A couple of questions for you. One is, your objection notes the lack of bungalows or affordable smaller housing on the open market. Do you agree with the officer's report at paragraph 108 and that this is not a matter today as it wasn't addressed in the outline application. What's your view on that? And then secondly, you mentioned concerns over landscaping and lack of community facility. Do you have a view on the issues over access as mentioned in the officer's report at para 31, which seems to be at odds with what you've been saying?
I'm trying to remember those 2 points. In terms of bungalows, I think Councillor Holmes described the background to it quite well. I think members should be aware that at the very outset of the consultation process for this in Conningham Village Hall, we were shown indicative plans which included bungalows, which I could only assume was to get some sort of community buy-in. So it's somewhat disappointing to us that they've been dropped. That disappointment is confirmed with a policy backing. I think it's quite interesting, the NPPF update you just had from Mr. Newbury in terms of the weight you must now give as decision makers to local design codes and neighbourhood planning policies. And to that end, policy G of the neighbourhood plan, which Councillor Holmes mentioned a moment ago, specifically mentions the changing needs of an ageing demographic. And I think most of us here would recognise that that's bungalows and the like. But the actual report that meant, what I think was it 108, you said, Councillor Anderson, yeah. I would question the part that says the local planning authority has no power to control this aspect and cannot insist the development meets the policy requirements of policy G just because it wasn't conditioned at outline stage, because the outline stage and the appeal we went through was just that, it was outline. To that end, one could argue that the inspector at appeal didn't argue that this site shouldn't have a 64-storey tower block. But if that was put before you today, I'm sure you would refuse that, because that's not in the spirit of the local community or indeed the neighbourhood plan that's been approved at referenda and now has significant weight, as was described to you by the NPPF. So if I was a decision maker today, which obviously I'm not because I've recused myself from it, I would be questioning whether the plan that's before you does accurately reflect the neighbourhood plan's ambitions and the policies contained within it. And I would probably be looking to the developer to go away and try and bring back some small revisions that would make that acceptable. And, you know, we accept the principle that development is now going to happen on this site. We just want the best type of development that meets the needs of the village as set out in our approved and made neighbourhood plan. And in terms of your other point, which was access, I think the frustration from our part in terms of why this hasn't come before you yet, even though we've had multiple attempts to do so, is the stalling process. So as it says in the report, you're being asked today to make a decision based on what's before you, whilst also noting that at a further point, there's then going to be an application to change what's being approved because the bridge access isn't sufficient. So there's an acknowledgement from officers that a further application is going to be needed to change the bridge access, which I believe is to widen it. My argument would be that the widening of something by its very nature is going to have an impact on the rest of it. If you're widening the bridge, something's going to go, and that would be a part of the landscape and the tree element around that entry. And if panel today decides that there are slight revisions that you would want to make on other elements, then it would seem sensible to me to ask officers to bring that back when it's all done together, so you can approve a master plan, if you will, for the whole site, including every possible iteration of plans that need to go forward, rather than asking you today to approve this as it stands, whilst also telling you that once you've approved it, we're then going to need to amend it afterwards. So I think that would be my response to that.
Thank you. Councillor Cohen, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I apologise because this is a slightly drawn out question, but I promise you it's a question. You can trust me. So we have just been told by Mr. Newbury that we are going to be absolutely obliged by the revised MPPF to give exceptional weight. I'm slightly paraphrasing David, to local design policy. And of course, for this purpose, and I'm now looking, colleagues, at pages 23 and 24 of our notes, the neighbourhood plan, because there is no better statement of local design policy than an approved neighbourhood plan. Could you just give me your view of this proposal in terms of the neighbourhood plan? And I'm looking specifically, because we can only look at specific aspects today. Objective 1, which refers to the density of housing characteristic of the area. I'm looking at number 2, which says that new housing will include a number of smaller dwellings. And I'm particularly concerned in that regard about 2 beds. I'm looking at number 3, that says good design includes replica architectural features, and with that, number 4, new development will be sensitive to Collingham's history and heritage. And colleagues, it may be helpful that when you're looking at the slide, the slides, I can't help but notice one of the things that was shown as reference as locals actually in my ward in Woodley. I'm not quite sure how far we're casting this particular net, but apparently my house can be included. No, I don't. I'm looking at number 10, improving public rights of way connectivity, and I'm also looking at 13, promoting walking and cycling to the village centre. So they're local things that we have to look at. How does this tie into those? Thanks, Jeff.
I didn't quite catch the last part of your question, your final sentence, Councillor Cohen.
That was the best bit. I gave some specific of how does this proposal tie into and meet those criteria. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cohen. I would say that so far the neighbourhood plan has been given very little regard, particularly with all those points you've raised there. It contains sufficient information to allow a developer to go away and produce a high quality design. It contains information about the density of housing in all the surrounding areas. And we expect, as described in the document here, that there to be transition to the target densities of 30 per hectare. But that means at Millbeck Green, for example, the density is 10.9, which is a third of the target that we're looking at now. So there has to be some kind of transition from that density to a more appropriate one for not using unnecessary amounts of land for the development of housing. At the moment, the density is far too high over the majority of the site, and particularly on all the site boundaries. You mentioned materials. They're listed out. It couldn't be easier. Some of them have been incorporated to some extent. Basically, the neighbourhood plan says the buildings will be millstone. Okay, we've got replica stone there, which is a compromise that might be acceptable. It mentions forward gables. We have some of those. It says stepped corbels. None of those. Round-headed or circular windows and radiating bands of stone. None of those. Porches with Roman arches. None of those. Side entrances with Roman arches. None of those. Grass strips in verges. I remain to be convinced, even though I noticed on those new slides that there were some small verges in grass in Woodley, which is interesting. It also says that we shouldn't accept a pastiche design, which is exactly what we have. In my opinion, this design could be picked up from Birmingham or Glasgow or wherever and dropped in equally. It's nothing related to Collingham whatsoever. 14.7 in the neighbourhood plan talks about the density transitions. Then going on to the bungalows, it says proposals should include small housing designed to the latest accessible housing standards. Consideration should be given towards the provision of level access flats, bungalows and sheltered housing schemes. That's describing how policy G should work. And it's just been ignored, and I don't understand it. What's the point of having this as a made document if it's not used? We really do need to be considering the housing for the older demographic. It's even worse now following COVID. Nobody wants to go into a nursing home. But people want to have their own self-independence. We haven't got the housing stock in Collingham for that. We need this development, which is going to be the biggest in Collingham for years, in all likelihood, to be appropriate for our needs. It's as simple as that.
I think it's probably worth just pointing out as well in terms of Collingham as a village. So in the referral letter that my colleagues and I sent to the officer at the time, referring this to panel here, we laid out the material planning reasons, and one of those is that policy D of the neighbourhood plan wasn't conformed with, and the wording we used was that design of the proposed dwellings feel very much standard volume house builder in style. And I think what we mean by that is this is an identikit development, and there are actually very good examples in Collingham itself. When you look to the estate next door, for example, Millbeck Green, which is on the slides, that symbolises the architectural design in Collingham. It's stone, it's got features. This hasn't what's being proposed. Majority is stone, and we don't particularly welcome the use of brick in this location, just because again, it doesn't reflect what's in that immediate location. And on the broader point, I think I'd say that we've gone to some effort as a community to get a neighbourhood plan in place that describes our housing need. And that's about getting our market moving as well. And over, I think, 6-7 years now, I've been active in that area. I've knocked on a lot of doors in that part of Collingham. And you knock on doors of 5-bedroom, very expensive houses where often there's a single gentleman or lady into their 80s and 90s, and all of their friends live in Collingham. And they're sat in a house that they want to leave because they want to release the equity from it, and it's too much for them. But there's nowhere in Collingham for them to go. And all we're doing here is delivering more cases like that. We're not freeing up the market for Mrs. Miggins to downsize to this very nice new development and allow a family to move into her home and the house they're moving out of, a first-time buyer to buy, and have the market moving. We're not actually changing the housing need by this application. And that is our appeal, I guess, to the developers, is to say, look, we'll work with you. We've tried to work with you, and certainly Julian has. Interestingly, ward councillors haven't been approached by the developer throughout, not since my time as a councillor anyway, 6 years. But we welcome it, it's there. We just want to see some small tweaks now, which would make this appropriate for the village of Collingham.
I will bring Councillor Lamb in a moment, but I just wanted to ask Julian, have you had an opportunity to express these things in conversations with the developer, particularly the housing mix?
I've had no opportunity to talk to the developer. We've responded on the planning portal, and to be honest, I've had no response from Leeds City Council officers either. It's been complete radio silence as far as we're concerned, and it's been ridiculous.
Have you approached the developer for a conversation, say on the parish council, for example?
Not directly since the last application, which was with a joint one with Bellway. We've been waiting for them to come back with a proposal that would be considered to be worthy of further consideration. The iteration, we're on iteration G, but the changes have been so minor that they've not taken our comments on board at all.
Thank you. And on your point about the council, I think at some point David might like to update the panel on the situation with the backlog resulting from COVID and therefore the difficulties we've experienced. Yeah. Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's 4 points that I'd like to explore a bit further with both Councillor Holmes and Councillor Stevenson. So first of all, on the point about bungalows, as you know, I chaired the Weatherby Neighbourhood Plan. And I can't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but we did a housing needs assessment for the whole district as part of that, which identified that I recall somewhere between 12 and 15% of new builds needed to be bungalows for the exact reason that Councillor Stevenson has just described. So you've covered that in quite detail, but I think it is just worth dwelling on exactly those points and why it is so important in our out of community to increase bungalow provision. I wonder if you could talk, you just touched a bit on engagement and performance. I don't know if you're aware and have a view on the reasons why Grove Road in Boston Spa wasn't included in the presentation rather than Boston Spa. I suspect I know why it wasn't included, and that might come in my questions to officers in a little while. But it's not exactly an exemplar development. The community engagement was poor. It's been riddled with development issues. The quality and design is not great, and we are still having problems despite the fact they've left the site. But I wonder if you have any comments about that. And then finally, I would be grateful if you could just comment on how the green space and open space is presented in the plan and how you see that actually being useful to residents of the new development and existing residents.
Yeah, I've said, I think, more than enough on the need for bungalows. I would just say that the way to resolve that is, as Councillor Holmes described, the density concerns we've got on this iteration, which changes from the last one. A way to resolve that, of course, would be bungalows. You know, you could take out a couple of the larger houses or otherwise and replace them with bungalow provision, and that would help with some of the density issues. So I don't think we're being unreasonable in asking that not just policy is stuck to, as Mr. Newbury's described the reasons you've got to now take into consideration, but we're trying to be proactive and not just saying that this should be refused today, end of. We're trying to say how we think this could get to a situation where it would be appropriate for you as panel to approve it. And in terms of the other examples, I think I'm not fully au fait with Grove Road, but all I'll say is that another scheme, Church Fields in Boston Spa, is arguably the type of scheme that we would want in Collingham. I think it would earn a European award for architecture or something, because developers worked hard with the ward members and the community to get a scheme that worked well and crucially reflected both housing need and design within that part of the city. And that's all we're asking for, is that the same parity be applied to Collingham. I'll let Councillor Holmes do green space.
Yeah, I would add to that as well, that we're working with another developer for a scheme in Linton, where we're trying to achieve really high quality design standards. We're having, you know, one-to-one meetings with those guys and improving the design ahead of the outline application being made, which I believe has now been submitted. So none of that happened with Miller Homes. In relation to the landscape, and I think let's be clear, the areas GH and I are there for flood protection. They're described as wetland grasslands. That's not going to be appropriate for general amenity use. Yes, there may be some positive visual impacts, but it's not land that people can use. Surrounding those areas, GH and I, got relatively steep slopes that are too steep for people to safely walk up and down without proper surface footways and things like that, which we haven't got. So that then basically just means that there's areas within the development where we have existing hedgerows that will have some landscaping adjacent to them, and we'll have the area for the attenuation tank to potentially use, and that's down as a wildflower meadow. So in terms of areas that you could use for play or for leisure or for anything like that, there really isn't anything.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? Yes, Nicole.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Holmes, you said that community engagement was woeful. What community engagement has there been?
In relation to this application, none. But there was engagement in relation to the previous one, which is still extant, by the way, which Mill Homes and Bellway have done together. There's a small amount of engagement for that one, but in relation to this one, none.
I made as well. So I don't want to mislead you in that 5 years ago, I think it was, I had a meeting here in Civic Hall with the previous agent for when it was a Bellway and Miller Home application. At that point, I asked for further meetings throughout the process as ward members, and I've had no dialogue with any developer since then, and certainly not on this iteration of the application. I think it's worth noting as well that not everybody understands the planning process like we do. And there are effectively at the moment 2 applications live for this site, and a lot of residents in the area have commented on the 2017 version rather than 2019 version, and their comments aren't really reflected in anything you've been told today, but those residents think they've already made their objections clear, and that just goes to show I suppose, tactics being used by developers at the moment to sort of conflate the issues, and it's made that harder for us as ward members to explain to our residents what this application is about. Many of them think this is about the principle of houses being built, because we're now on sort of 3 or 4 different iterations of it, and that's made the process much harder, echoed again by the fact that we haven't had any dialogue really with the developer throughout. I have had dialogue with officers in my monthly meetings, and I've expressed those views with them, for which I thank them for their ears.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Nash next, please.
In view of the fact that the SAP allowed 150 dwellings and we now have 129 before us, could you tell me how many, Councillor Holmes, is in your plan? How many properties there would be?
The neighbourhood plan is not allowed to allocate land for housing, so we had to stay well clear of doing that, because the neighbourhood plan has to be in conformity with the site allocations plan, which was evolving when we were doing the neighbourhood plan. So we in our neighbourhood plan can't say any site throughout the whole of Collingham how many houses that could have. But in terms of density, if it was to be the same as Millbeck Green, we'd be looking at 1/3 of the number of houses that we have now. So if you were to go somewhere between the two, you'd probably get to a reasonable compromise.
It's all right. Do you want to come back? Yep.
I'm sorry, Councillor Holmes, in the plan that you submitted, which I've read thoroughly, there's a comparison between what is proposed and what your proposal is. You say fewer plots, larger gardens. So I haven't counted every property on your plan, but how many are there?
I think there must be some confusion between those 2 drawings. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the neighbourhood plan, so I apologise for that. But the drawing on the left that you have there is from the outline planning application, and that's somewhere between 110 and 120 plots. It was never quite defined. The drawing on the right is the current one. I think that's what you're looking at. So we haven't been specific in terms of saying 60 houses, 80 houses is appropriate, but we have got all the guidance people need within the neighbourhood plan.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the information that you brought, and thank you for coming to the meeting today. I'm afraid you'll have to wipe down your microphones and return to the gallery. Thank you. Members, are there any questions to officers, please? Oh, sorry, we do have the applicants who, once their microphones and places are sanitised down, would like to come forward. Would the applicants like to come forward, please? Thank you very much. Would you like to introduce yourselves and just explain to us how you planning to split the time? Who's speaking?
Oh, yeah. Good afternoon, Chair. It's John Dunbavin from ID Planning. I'm the planning consultant for Miller Homes, and I have Dr. Tilford from Wheatwoods. I'll be speaking on in relation to the planning matters, and Dr. Tilford will go on to the flood risk and the benefits associated with that, if I may.
Are you splitting the time between you equally?
We are indeed,
Okay.
roughly 1 minute for myself and 3 minutes for Dr. Tilford, but well, we'll be happy to answer questions thereafter.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, in your own time, please make a start.
Okay, yeah, Chair, members, good afternoon. It's good to be back in person rather than virtual. Can I deal with the matter of engagement? There has been 2 meetings with the Parish Council in relation to the design aspects of this scheme and the neighbourhood plan. And the scheme has evolved through that process. The number of dwellings have reduced from the original scheme of 147 down to 129. There have been layout changes and amendments to the house types. All those changes have ensured that we comply with policies A, D and G of the neighbourhood plan. The proposals also fully meet all of the design criteria of neighbourhoods for living. The open space greatly exceeds the current core statutory requirement, and the scheme is policy compliant in respect of mix, space standards, affordable housing and accessible homes, even when on certain aspects we don't need to because of the basis of the outline approval. The scheme improves connectivity in Collingham with a footpath link between Harrogate Road and Leeds Road, but moreover, it provides significant flood mitigation measures for the wider village, which Dr. Tilford will now comment on.
Thank you, John. Firstly, may I say that the applicant has consulted extensively with the relevant statutory consultees in respect of flood risk and drainage, and that neither the Environment Agency, the lead local flood authority, nor Yorkshire Water object to the proposals. The principal source of flood risk to the site is Collingham Beck. According to the Environment Agency flood map for planning, the majority of the site and approximately 75% of the development platform, the part of the site that houses will actually be built on, is in flood zone 1. That is, it's at a low risk of river flooding and would not flood even during an extreme 1 in 1,000 event. To mitigate flood risk for the remaining 25% of the development platform, ground levels will be raised so that the entire development platform and hence all houses will be located in flood zone 1 and at a low risk of river flooding. To ensure the development will not increase flood risk elsewhere, compensatory flood storage will be provided on land adjacent to the development platform. The storage area will temporarily store floodwater during large flood events. However, the storage area will only activate when flows exceed a predefined threshold equivalent to the 1 in 100 plus climate change event. For flows below this threshold, no water from Collingham Beck would enter the storage facility. Most of the time, the storage area will not contain floodwater. The design of the flood storage area takes into account the projected impact of climate change, thereby ensuring that the development will not increase flood risk elsewhere in its lifetime. Indeed, detailed modelling indicates that the proposals will actually reduce the risk of flooding to over 20 properties on Millbeck Green and Crabtree Green. The climate change allowance used in the original design of the flood storage area was superseded in 2016. However, I can confirm that the flood storage area will prevent an increase in downstream flood risk, even for the current climate change projections. The Environment Agency recently highlighted that a new hydraulic model of Collingham Beck had been developed as part of a wider modelling study of the River Wharfe catchment. A detailed review confirms that this model does not affect the submitted information. The Environment Agency agrees. The development access road will be above the level of the 1 in 1,000 flood event, thereby providing safe, dry access to the site. Aside from the above, the development will provide additional flood storage to the south of the development platform so that a flood wall can be constructed to reduce flooding of Leeds Road. Moving to drainage, surface water runoff from the development will be discharged to Collingham Beck at a restricted rate that does not exceed the existing natural runoff rate. As such, the development will not increase flood risk downstream due to surface water runoff. In addition, the proposed drainage scheme includes a below-ground storage tank to temporarily store runoff to ensure that the development does not flood during large storm events. All the flood risk mitigation measures and the approach to surface water drainage were approved at outline stage. In conclusion, I can confirm that the development will be safe from flooding and will not increase flood risk for its lifetime. I can also confirm that the Environment Agency agrees this to be the case. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to both of you. Are there any questions, members? I do have Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions, if I may. So first of all, you said there were 2 meetings with the parish council. Could you just confirm what the dates of those meetings were, please? Just roughly month and year.
You're probably talking about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago. But the design comments were very, very clear from the parish council and they have been taken on board.
Okay, I think the question's been clearly answered there. And can you comment on how much of the green and open space will actually be usefully accessible? So for example, where could you kick a ball around? Where could you walk, run, etc., etc.?
Just to be clear, the open space policy requirement as conditioned in the outline is met within, I think, areas F, H and I. Oh, can I please just answer it?
Still allow the speaker to finish, Alan,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
I'll bring you back in.
The open space areas F, H and I on the plan, which are not the dry attenuation basins, meet the policy requirement, and that's where you can have usable play area. But all of the open space on site, which significantly exceeds even the old core strategy policy, is usable for recreation purposes.
Do you wish to come back, Councillor Lamb? Thank you. Any further questions?
Jonathan, normally you are pragmatic when it comes to trying to consult with us, as you and I have crossed swords in a number of times and will continue to do so in the future. However, you've heard what the 2 councillors have said in terms of wanting to work to try and get a solution. Do you think your clients would be willing to defer this application so that these conversations can take place, so that you can get a way forward that everybody can be happy with?
Afternoon, Councillor Anderson. Yes, we have crossed swords many a time, but always in a very amicable manner. I've discussed this with my clients. We have a scheme which is fully policy compliant with the neighbourhood plan, the core strategy, the outline, neighbourhoods for living, and our view is we have gone as far as we can, and we would ask members to determine this application. It is fully policy compliant. We think it's a good scheme, Councillor Anderson. You know, this has significant benefits for the local community and is a good quality design. So we would respectfully ask for a decision today, please.
I would like to ask a question now, if I may. I believe in the presentation that we had, Jenna pointed out some examples that you'd given visually from Bramhope. I found it difficult when I first looked at this paper to understand what this development would look like built out as a street scene, because all I've seen are flat drawings and plans. I understand you were asked for some CGIs, and I recognise that that may have been too late to produce them, but I find it extremely difficult to understand what this will actually do visually without something like a CGI to help me from various different angles. So I just need to ask you then, in the light of the fact that you chose the Bramhope scheme as an example, is this scheme going to look anything like that as I drive past?
Interesting question. No, not exactly, but there are similarities. I acted on the Bramhope scheme in relation to both the outline and the reserve matters. So you do have open space and a balancing pond at the front. The Bramhope scheme is different in that it has a large roundabout and a convenience store at the corner. But when you go into the site, you've got Spring Woods on the right-hand side, but you do have tree-lined streets and so on. The images were there for the house types, not necessarily to reflect how the development will look overall.
So I therefore have to ask you then, would you be prepared to go away and return again with some images that do tell me what this will look like when it's built out? And would you be prepared to make some amendments in the light of the recent guidance that we've had on design?
I'd need to take client instructions on the CGI point. I understand why you'd want to see it. The request came too late. The industry is very busy at the moment, and trying to produce that sort of thing in a short time frame is very, very difficult. In terms of amendments, my instructions are clear. We have a policy compliance scheme, and on that basis, we don't think there is any scope to make further amendments. But I can, if you would like, take some instructions on CGI.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Nash.
Potential flooding in Collingham is a serious business. For many years, I was a member of the Environment Agency's Flood Defence Committee. And 15 years ago, I met a woman who lived in a bungalow in Collingham downstream. And when the beck overflowed, there were 5 feet of water in her bungalow. So it is a serious matter. And I would like more explanation on the flood defences that you are using, not just to protect this estate, but obviously downstream. And just a minor instance, but it would help. Is each property going to have a water butt? Because it's during the times of sudden downfalls that flooding does occur.
Yes, I appreciate the issues related to flooding in Collingham. I've been working on this site for the best part of 7 years now, so I'm very familiar with the fairly recent flood events actually, and the issues that has caused in the past. In respect of this development, first of all, as I said in my presentation, almost 3/4 of the development platform is not at risk of flooding from Collingham Beck already. Okay, about 25% of it will be raised because it is at risk during an extreme flood event. So the entire development platform will be in what's known as flood zone 1. It'll be at a low risk of flooding from Collingham Beck. That's this development. In addition to that, finished floor levels will be raised to provide another layer of mitigation, if you will. Okay, so that's the first thing. But raising ground levels has consequences because floodwater that previously occupied that space will be displaced elsewhere during a large flood event. Okay, and it's not acceptable for obvious reasons to displace floodwater and increase flood risk elsewhere. Okay, now that's the purpose of what's been called the compensatory flood storage area. That storage area to the west or the left of the development platform. Okay, that storage area, thank you, it's on the screen now. That storage area is designed to store a large volume of water. Okay, and in doing so, that will prevent any increase in flood risk downstream. Okay, but it will actually do more than that. It will reduce flood risk downstream. By downstream, I mean to the existing development on Millbeck Green and also some properties on Crabtree Green as well. So what I will say is that this development is going above and beyond, actually, in terms of flood risk mitigation. It has a belt and braces approach to mitigating flood risk to the new properties that will be constructed, but it will also reduce flood risk downstream tangibly, okay, for extreme flood events. I mean, I hope that provides some reassurance. You know, we're taking this very seriously, and we're not just doing a bare minimum here. We're going above and beyond in terms of mitigating flood risk.
Councillor Nash, would you like to come back? Yes.
Yes, briefly, that is quite reassuring. But to achieve water conservation, would you provide water butts to each property?
My apologies, I missed out on the second point. I have to say, it's not something that I've considered as part of the flood risk mitigation approach. So as far as surface water runoff goes, okay, and surface water runoff it comes from 2 sources, from roofs and from hard standing and access roads. That runoff will be restricted. So ultimately that runoff will enter the Collingham Beck, okay, in accordance with building regulations and so on, and various priorities for the disposal of surface water. The key point there is that the peak rate at which surface water runoff can enter the Beck will be restricted. Okay, so that actually it will be significantly lower than it currently is. At the very least, a development may not increase runoff rates compared to existing rates. This development will reduce rates significantly. So, and that's without the use of water butts, okay? That's simply by controlling the rate at which runoff enters into the beck. Now, I don't know the position on water butts, it seems like a sensible idea to me, but in terms of compliance with technical guidance, planning policy and the like, surface runoff rates will be significantly reduced without the use of water butts. I'm sure it would be a great idea to encourage householders to actually employ water butts as well, and that will provide further
Would you
reduction.
consider it? Would you take it away and consider it?
Absolutely, there's no reason not to, yeah.
Councillor Nash, we do have Tom Beavis from our council flood risk team. Would you like to have any confirmation from Tom on this issue?
Actually, I was quite satisfied with the arrangements which have been made regarding flooding. But the second part was on water conservation. And people do use a lot of water. And of course, all these houses will have water meters. So the more they use, the more it's going to cost them. So if there were water butts, which they could use for garden use and for washing cars or whatever, it would assist.
I totally agree. Absolutely.
Thank you for considering it. Thank you. Can I bring Councillor Anderson in next, please?
Sorry, I was just going to confirm that the clients have agreed to water butts.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was going to ask Jenna the question as to who brought up the Bramhope, but if it was you that brought up Bramhope, then fine. I can now say what I was going to say. That was not the greatest example, because elected members on that side, not necessarily people present here today, have made a lot of negative comments to me about what I'm going to do to try and improve the Bramhope layout, etc. And also Lake Bramhope, in the way that the flood remediation has taken place at that location as well. Are you really saying who came forward with the idea? Because it doesn't look, I get a lot of complaints about the way that the site at Bramhope looks, and that's from across the political spectrum. And I get a lot of complaints about the way that the flood alleviation has been dealt with. Not all down to Miller Homes, I must admit, because part of it was due to Yorkshire Water not getting things right as well. So I'll concede that. But would you like to clarify the lessons that may have been learnt from the Bramhope one that you would hope would not be repeated at this site if this permission was to be granted?
I think I'll answer it in a different way, Councillor Anderson. The purpose of those images was to give you a flavour for the materials. It wasn't drawing a comparison between the scheme at Collingham and the scheme at Bramhope. They are obviously different.
Okay, I made my point.
Does that answer your
No,
point?
it doesn't. But
No.
I mean,
Would you like to go back?
Well, I mean, well, okay. I don't think you were the agent at the Miller Homes one, were you? Out in Bramhope.
I was indeed, but the schemes are two different schemes with
Yeah, well,
completely different design.
anyway, I mean, okay then, if you, oh yes, you were, because you promised to give us money for the Dyneley Arms, didn't you? Yeah, which you were never asked for by the inspector, so that's not your fault. But no, so do you, in retrospect, when you now see the site, do you think it looks aesthetically pleasing from the road? Do you think it looks good from the road? Or the way that local residents would have preferred, a scheme that was more in keeping with the context of what already was in Bramhope, would, in retrospect, have been a better way forward? And where I'm coming up from that is, would it not then be better to come up with a design that meets the needs of the local community so we don't run into this again?
If I'm perfectly candid with you, Councillor Anderson, I haven't seen the site since it's been under construction. I've had no need over the past 18 months to travel into Leeds. I've been doing everything by Zoom or Teams. So I can't answer that question for you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I have reason to drive past it weekly, and hence my request for CGIs. Okay. Are there any further questions from anyone? Well, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate the fact that you've come and answered those questions honestly. Thank you very much indeed. And are there
Thank
any
you.
questions for members, for officers, please, members? You've got a lot. Well, shall we give Councillor Nash the first go and then bring you in, Councillor Anderson?
Well, I've just got one question in that the outline plan, as we are now informed, it looks rather different from what is now before us today. So what I'd like to know is how many properties are there in this development? And if outline permission was given on the basis that there were going to be bungalows, why have we not insisted that bungalows be built? I'm sorry, it's awkward with having the microphone to the left and the top of the table to the right. Sorry about that.
That's fine, Councillor Nash. Jenna, do you like to have a go at that?
Best, yeah. So yeah, the plan that you refer to with the smaller amount of units on it is the indicative site layout plan. So it was purely indicative for the purposes of the appeal, for the outline and the appeal. So the outline granted outline permission for the development and the detailed consideration of access. Those were the only two. So it was the principal and the access, and then the detail in terms of appearance, layout, scale. That's what we're considering now. So there wasn't a requirement. There's no condition or in the legal agreement that they need to deliver bungalows on the site. There's no specific wording in the neighbourhood plan that refers to bungalows, nor is there in the core strategy. So it's an aspiration, and we don't have any mechanism to make them do this on this site. So yeah, I think when the inspector did look at in a housing mix, they were happy or satisfied that most of the 1 and 2 bedroom units would be delivered in the city centre, and that's in the appeal in the officer, well, the inspector's report attached to the appeal decision. So that's our officer's assessment of where things are and why there aren't bungalows on this site. And it's the same with other sites in Leeds, that we don't actually have that policy that ties it down to bungalows. So that's why there aren't any on this site. I think we have asked the developer, and they haven't been willing to do that, and there is no reason. There's no we don't have the tools to make them do that either. So we have asked, we've tried, but it's the situation where we are. It's an old decision. Application came in 2014, determined in 2016, and since then a lot of things have moved on, but the position is what was in that outline decision and what the inspector felt relevant. So I think
I'm going to bring David in on this one, because I was particularly interested in the points that have already been made about density in terms of bungalows and where we sit there, and whether we could make any reasonable requests in that area. David.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I totally understand the point that has been made in respect of, you see something on an illustrative plan, and then when something comes forward, it's not what you get. And I understand the frustration that can cause. But Jenna is 100% right in the way that she's described it. We don't have a policy impetus to actually insist on these things. The way that we deal with it in terms of where we do have the policy is policy H10, which deals with accessible housing in terms of delivering housing for people's lifetimes, and that it's adaptable. In terms of the point about density, the inspector in dealing with the appeal addressed this in some detail. And I'll quote from the inspector's decision, so please just bear with me. He said, unusually, the illustrative master plan, and that's the plan that we've been shown of the outline, shows 110 to 120 dwellings on the site, whilst the proposal is for up to 150. However, the proposal is in outline with layout and design reserved matters. That's what's before us. The scheme would generally follow the existing built form and be largely self-contained, and the council would retain control over the details when submitted. And obviously that's where we're at, and that's what we're considering at this present time. Then he moves on, and this is pertinent to the point that was raised by Councillor Holmes. And he said the density of the proposal would be 35 dwellings per hectare, and this is in the context of 150 dwellings. So in that context, the density of the proposal would be 35 dwellings per hectare, compared to a nearby development at Crabtree Green, which is 7.6 dwellings per hectare, and Millbeck Green, which even ignoring those properties with long gardens, is only 13 dwellings per hectare. As a result, the council considers the proposed housing would be intense. So we had that argument at the appeal about the density and the impact on character, and this is what the inspector said about it. He moved on and he said, however, core strategy policy H3 requires housing in small settlements to meet or exceed a density of 30 dwellings per hectare. The core strategy states that density should only be reduced for exceptional townscape reasons. Then he says this bit, which might hurt. He says, there is nothing exceptional in terms of character or any overriding concern in design terms that would justify lower density in this case. 30 dwellings per hectare would mean at least 132 dwellings on the site. So that was the position of the inspector. That was the position of the inspector in December 2016. Of course, Councillor Stevenson and Councillor Holmes pointed to policy changes since that time. However, there's nothing in the thrust or in the detail of the policy which would alleviate us of any difficulty with that paragraph if we were at appeal. So that's that context. So that's why, as officers, when we've got policies which encourage the efficient use of land, we come forward with a scheme which is more dense than some of the neighbouring streets. So there's a context there to your consideration, members, in terms of the impact of this development, in terms of the layout, scale of the housing, whether it's appropriate or not. In terms of the public open space, I can just touch on that as well. That was the inspector, in effect, fixed that at the inquiry. The inspector came to the view that the 4.45 hectares, which was shown on the outline plan, which is to all intents and purposes the same as we have now, was acceptable, maybe with regard to the exception being maybe plot F on that plan. But G, H and I, the inspector came to the view that that was acceptable as public open space to meet and exceed our policies. However, having said all of that, having listened to Councillor Stevenson, and Councillor Stevenson said we're very close in his eyes as a local community, quite close to proposal with only small changes. There's obviously the issue of the CGI, and there's appears to be an issue of discomfort in terms of being able to judge this scheme, because all we've got so far is the Bramhope scheme, and we're told can't compare that. So I wouldn't necessarily say to members, if you've got concerns, don't feel forced into making a decision today on the application, because the feeling I'm getting is that we're probably not too far away from getting a proposal which is acceptable to the local community. I would have thought if small changes, we stand a reasonable prospect of negotiating an acceptable scheme with the applicant as well, and with the prospect of bringing back some illustrative material to hopefully put my members' minds at rest that we're delivering a quality development. But having said that, I'd also say you've got to manage expectations, and this is really to the local residents, because we're working in a policy context and a context of an appeal decision, which has fixed a number of points. So it won't be massive. We won't bring back something massively different. It's as Councillor Stevenson described. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Very helpful, David. Very helpful clarification. So, Councillor Anderson, could I ask you to be reasonably succinct?
You've put me in a bit of a quandary now, because if we were to go down that route, I wouldn't need to go into as much detail if we were going down that route. So I'll try and
paraphrase.
Housing needs assessment. What does the housing needs assessment say? for this area? You want, in terms of bungalows and in terms of older people? What does the housing needs assessment say? Not what the not what other people say. What is the demand when you actually did it? Because certainly most of the major sites, we have that information available to us. When one of the things during the development plans panel discussions we had on the site allocations plan, we talked about developing master planning. So why was the concept of master planning not looked at for this site? Because you could have then incorporated a greenway connectivity. You could have looked at the best way of laying the area out by working with local ward members and with the parish councils. Why was that not taken forward? And in terms of and if you look at paragraphs 51 and 52, how many of these, that's about the neighbourhood plan, how many of these are actually being met in this development? You have to question that. Waste management, what are you doing about waste management? Because we're now meant to be working more closely with waste management in terms of the design and layout. So there's been no specific reference as to how we're going to deal with that. The only comment I saw was that one of the reasons for changing the internal design was because of waste management conflict. So someone's obviously thinking about it. What's the biodiversity gain? I'm trying to paraphrase a bit more. And apart from the enforcement action being taken out at Bramhope, what other outstanding enforcement actions are there against the developer citywide in terms of how difficult it is to get things done? Even though there's conditions there, actually getting it done to meet the conditions, because we can put a whole lot of conditions on today, but if they're not going to be met, and enforcement are going to find it difficult, either because they're not written correctly, because that often, legal will often say, well, I wouldn't have worded it that way, so that's fine. So that's why I'm asking those questions. I've paraphrased down, but there are others, but if you can answer those ones, it'd probably be satisfactory.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there. Do you feel you're able to tackle them all? Because there could be the opportunity of bringing them back, depending where we go. So if you want to have a stab at those that you have information about, and we may be able to look at those outside the meeting.
Thanks, Chair. I'll come back to you on the housing needs assessment. Yeah, I'll come back to you on that one. In terms of the SAP, so we design briefs and master planning. They were mainly for the HG2 sites, so the proposed sites that were going to come forward and potentially phase, and there were the bigger sites, and they were in the green belt, and there was a lot more harm, and that balance, there was a bit more work to be done on those sites. So with this one having it was an identified site because it had a permission, so that work, those attaching site requirements and things like that wasn't necessary to an identified site, and it was just the capacity was carried forward, the permission, the numbers, and that was instantaneously moved forward into the SAP and counted in terms of housing mix. In terms of the neighbourhood plan, I have looked at the neighbourhood plan a lot, and I've gone through the various objectives and the various policies, and I do feel like this scheme does deliver on those. So we have, in terms of the design, then it says development will maintain substantial separation from our neighbouring villages. I think this one does. It rounds off the village of Collingham, minimises the quantity of land required. It does. It'll bring forward the not the greenbelt land. It'll stick within the remit of the allocation, the HG 1519 site, and the density, as we've discussed, is in keeping with the characteristic of the area. Good design will enhance the appearance of any new development. We've pushed for the use of stone, heads and sills. We've gone back numerous times and just trying to tweak the design in that detail to get it right. Development is designed to sit sensitively within the existing environment. So we're using a variety of house types, variety of materials. We're trying to break that up so that when you're on neighbouring developments, if you've got a slate roof, you would look out and you'd see the grey slate coloured roofs, pepper potting the affordables within the site. I do feel like the scheme has listened to the neighbourhood plan and is doing enough. Architectural features that will add positivity to the village. and large number of the units have the gable features with a bit of a vernacular style, and the landscaping. I'm confident that the plot planting and what will happen within the site will be of a decent quality, and that'll be controlled by condition. And then in terms of what's around the site, I think that is quite a spacious setting for a new volume house builder style development. I think that is quite unique and it is advantageous, and I'm not sure you'd be able to get that elsewhere on other sites in other areas in Leeds, to be honest. And yeah, the plan does list a number of objectives. One of them is promoting walking and cycling. We've got a footpath connection running through. The public rights of way team have been consulted there. There aren't any public rights of way in the area, but they'd be willing to, it's a positive that this would then be introduced. They'd like to see that adopted. So I think there are quite a few wins in terms of the neighbourhood plan, but I do take on board that design is subjective, and some residents and ward members may feel like it's not gone far enough. I feel like after all these years of negotiating, and we've got to a point in the sand, which is why we're here, and this is probably why we're at panel, is to open it up now for a discussion. Waste management and layout. I think with it being an unsustainable, well, it's a rural location, so it is quite car dependent. Collingham, it's in the outer areas. It's a smaller settlement in the core strategy, so I think it would be the usual traditional waste management, and we've worked with highways to ensure that the bends are widened so that they can fit the refuse vehicles around in the candidate turning. Also deliveries with the whole working from home thing, lots more deliveries, and Amazon and home shopping, so that, and we've got the circular link road now, so that there won't be dead ends and cul-de-sacs where there would be congestion. So we have tried, as officers, tried very hardest to get to this point. And biodiversity, that to get a net gain on the site, yeah, that's controlled by, I think it's condition 6. So there's no reason why that can't be achieved, and that's a condition on the outline. So they'd have to submit the detail to discharge condition 6 of the outline, and as part of that, we would our nature conservation and ecology officers would advise and assist and do that calculation with the metric, and get that to a point that the council were happy with in terms of a net gain. And obviously there's the local group wants to be involved with that as well, so that's something that the council could encourage. And I'm not entirely sure about the citywide Millers stuff. I've dealt with the Grove Road site. Yeah, I've only got experience of that site in terms of Millers, so maybe David.
Can I just come back on 2 small points, and then I will be quiet, honestly.
Thank you, Councillor.
In terms of the biodiversity, a number of applications that have come both before this panel and South and West recently. Richard Marsh has come along with a table explaining what the biodiversity gain has been, what the number of units are, etc., etc. This doesn't appear to be here. Now, is there a reason why you've not been able to get that brought forward? Because those of us who are on the climate emergency group, we are being advised to try and push more and more to get that taken in. Although these policies haven't yet been approved, we have been advised to keep pushing, and that's why I'm doing that. I'm doing the job I've been asked by SEAC to do. So that's where I'm coming from on that one. And then the other one you're talking about in terms of the master planning, but it won't take away from the need for bungalows and houses to downsize. You know, if you stick to what you've got just now, there will still be unmet need of bungalows.
You're into the debate. I think it's sensible to make that point just in a moment, if that's okay. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be pleased to know that Councillor Anderson covered a number of my questions. The issue of complaints, and I'll touch on it in comments around my experience with Grove Road, which Jenna will have shared. I'll touch on that then. The housing mix has been covered. I would like some more comment on, and I think one of the issues is I'm struggling to say I have enough information here to be able to make a decision. So I'm still haven't received a satisfactory answer about how the green space will be accessed and actually useful to people. So I'd appreciate some clarification on that. I'm assuming permitted development rights will apply to this site. And given a number of us, I suspect, have concerns about density, I'm foreseeing conservatories, sheds, more paraphernalia, extensions, and think, well, it's only going to get denser from here. So if you could confirm that. And then in terms of coming back to the demographics, there is policies, am I not correct, that say development should be meeting the changing needs of an aging demographic? And I'm struggling to see how this development as it is now does that.
Yes, I'll just take your point about the green space. So if I could I have that slide with it's got the purple or pink and the yellow on it, please, Toby. Yeah, so the areas F, H and I would equate to 11,337 square meters, and as part of the outline they were required to deliver 10,320 square meters. So even if you discount the yellow bits within the site because they're too small and they don't function, they're too small to be considered as an open green space, and you take the bits at the 3 elements at the bottom there, that does comply with the condition on the outline that the inspector assessed it on last time. So if the bit in to the west referred to as G, that's an additional, that's an as well as. So it'd be difficult to say that this scheme is not delivering on its open space provision when it meets the requirement, and there's the area to the west as well.
May I just come back on that, Chair? 'Cause the bit I'm struggling with, and I accept all of that, I'm just struggling to see from the plans what you would use it for, how it would actually, and is it actually accessible to people? Is it going to be something they can use for recreation?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be informal, so that would be of a more natural typology. We have, following Chair's brief, we have chatted to the developer and talked about informal footpaths or boulders or more natural type to open that up and to have it as a informal space, but to have something there that would be not formal and not a play area as such, but some sort of added visual interest to engage with the community. And you've got the footpath, so you'd come down the footpath and you could venture out into those areas. That would be the wildflower meadow and the bulb planting. So at certain times of the year that will look really attractive and be of interest, and other times it will be like in the winter it'll be more open, and there's no reason why you couldn't then kick a ball around in those areas. I'm not sure if the developer our agent has anything else to add in terms of that space.
I was going to say, can I just come in there as well, if that's okay, Chair, and just on that point, because there is a comparable scheme which Councillor Anderson will be aware of, and yourself are aware of as well, at Cookridge, where we've got a very similar mix in terms of a housing development which has got relatively smaller areas of more formalised amenity areas. You know, what you'd expect to see, whether it be children's playground or a formerly lawned area or turfed area, with quite large expanses in that instance of all kinds of flood defence and mitigation mechanisms, including things like swales included within that. And when I saw this scheme the first time, it easily drew the comparisons in my mind in terms of we are quite comfortably over the requirement from the outline consent in terms of the just over 10,000 square metres, and indeed when you can include the space known as G on the plan, I think we are at so over the 10,000 requirements, we've got just under 24,000 square metres, so we're over double when we take that into account. What we have done in terms of the Cookridge scheme is that we've opened those spaces up with more formal and informal footpaths through those, particularly looking at the multifunctionality of those spaces. And I take fully understand and appreciate where Councillor Holmes was coming from in terms of he was saying that they were very much for a flood purpose and shouldn't serve another purpose. But that's not the experience at Cookridge, and it wouldn't be the experience in my view here either. I think they would function as multifunctional spaces for recreation, flood defence on the very rare periods that they would come into effect. And I think there is opportunity there, and perhaps we're looking from members in terms of what the opportunity might look like in terms of the use of those spaces. But certainly for footpath routes through those, if we're looking at a wider biodiversity function in terms of wildlife or wildflower planting, for example, we could have information boards for local residents. So we could serve an educational purpose as well. That's something else we looked at Cookridge. So I think it's helpful for members perhaps to bear in mind that it is a similar situation that we've got at the Cookridge site. And here we could use the similar opportunities that gives us to try and use those spaces a little bit more creatively for multifunctional purposes.
Did you want to come in for Miller Holmes?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just going to confirm that we've had discussions with Jenna, and I think we would be agreeable to informal play equipment, rocks, boulders, logs, and so on, and informal footpaths through, and that can be designed up as part of a landscape works that are conditioned.
That's very helpful, because we did have actually quite a long discussion about this at Chair's brief, and it was my suggestion that we looked at an informal opportunity for play rather than a playground, as in swings and roundabouts and so on, because my personal view from my professional background is that those sorts of playgrounds are not as educationally beneficial as the more natural type that give more exploratory opportunities. So I'll own up to that being my suggestion. But I think the issue is that we need to see what it's going to look like and have more of an indication of where and how for me. Where am I up to? Councillor Cohen, please.
Thanks, Chair. I have to say my 11-year-old son would entirely agree with you about the informal play area. Anything you can jump off. Come back. Anyway, I went off piece there. Could you just answer, why is it that the affordables are only 2-bed? I have a real issue when we create affordables and say you can only have 2-bed. Really, it's not acceptable. There should be a proper mix of affordable. Elected members across the city, I am going to take a wild stab, get one of their biggest complaints of, we've got 2 bedrooms, we desperately need a 3rd bedroom, we're oversized, so we're overcrowded. And we're saying, no, you've got to leave where you've set down your roots, where children will be at school. It's just not acceptable. Why on earth have we accepted just 2 bedrooms? For me, I'd be absolutely, more than anything else for me, Chair, that's a deal breaker.
Thank you. Do I have any further questions? Oh, sorry, you're going to respond to that, Jenna, first. Yeah.
Just going to clarify, I've got 6 3-bedroom semi-detached, so on the
I'm not sure you were here when the corrections for the paper were given, Councillor Cohen. Would you like to just give those statistical corrections again, if you possibly could? I know you've got a sea of paper there. Sorry, I've put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I'll read it off. I have got a table here. I'll just read it off that, which might make it easier. So in terms of affordable housing, we have got 39 2-beds. Oh no, hang on, that's yeah. Sorry. Yeah, 13. I did do an update. Which, sorry, yeah, I've lost it in amongst it all.
Sorry, if I can assist, Chair, as well, I've got the figures in front of me. So the breakdown is as Jenna just said, actually 39 2-beds and 6 3-beds. That will be the breakdown of the affordable housing. But I think I certainly take Councillor Cohen's point in terms of the mix, and that we would normally look for a more pro rata mix of units in that respect. So I mean, it's certainly something that if members feel strongly on, we can take back and have that discussion with the developer.
Councillor Lamb.
Just one quick one, Chair. I wonder if it's possible, and I'm saying this from a current experience, and I suspect many members will have some sympathy. Our sports pitches in Wetherby are currently unusable, and hundreds of people have had to have their events cancelled because we have travellers visiting the site. if we don't do it now, it'll have to be done at some point. Could it be built in some means of preventing access to the green space? Because it looks like, given we'll be trying to do that in, and we've done it in many places in our area, it looks very attractive to me for a stopping off point.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Did you have any further questions, Councillor Cohen? Did we stop you mid?
Just to pick up Ryan's point, he is entirely correct. On that basis, we're moving towards something, but it's still not there. Is my new question, but I don't need an answer this minute. I'll pick it up in about 20 seconds.
Councillor Nash.
Yes, this has occurred to me after what's been said about 2-bedroom affordable housing. I was looking at the front elevation, and it seems to me that there is quite a steep slope on the roof. Would you consider converting these 2-bedroom properties to a 3-bedroom house with the 3rd bedroom being on a second floor, i.e. within the roof? It seems that there are blank gable ends to the walls. The window could quite easily be in the side wall. So that I think would be helpful. I mean, there are thousands of people in this city who do live in houses which are 3 stories rather than 2. So I think that would be acceptable. And the beauty of that is if they don't need the 3rd bedroom, they don't have to go up to that higher floor.
Yeah, we've just gone out of sequence because we were asking questions to officers and we've gone back to asking questions to developers. So can I invite the developer to comment on that if he wishes to?
I think that's unlikely. The affordable housing mix we have has been agreed with the registered provider. That is our starting point. What do the registered providers want? What do they recognise as the need in the area? And it's principally 2 beds, but also 3 beds. And that offer has been out there for some time. It's been discussed and agreed with officers. So I think it's unlikely, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Almas.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the officers, my question is around aesthetics that is obviously mentioned by some of the colleagues. In terms of the trees, did you mention 130 trees, new trees that were proposed? With 139 or 130 trees?
Yeah, I think it was
proposed?
higher than that.
Yeah, but I would be really interested to find out if we are, about the proposed development, are we losing any mature trees as well? Because obviously the plans are such that, you're bound to lose some trees that are already there. And if these trees that we are planting, they're not like little saplings, are they? They're like good sized trees for them to have the chance of survival. And I totally echo what Councillor Cohen's just said about the affordable housing as well. Thank you.
Before you come in, I'm going to ask David to comment on that area as well, please.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. It was just, I can recall the detail. It was, I think it's 59 trees to come out. So we get 3 for 1 replacement. So it just takes us up just shy of 180 replacement trees. 3 for 1, yeah. In terms of the actual detail of those trees, we haven't got to that discussion as yet. We're only looking at the sort of the structural landscaping. We would pick that up through a planning condition attached to the outline, which will enable us to look at the nature of the trees, the size of the trees, the species of the trees, the density of planting, all of those sort of matters. And there was another question which I probably don't know the answer to. Oh, was it?
Sorry, it was a comment that you'd agreed with a point that was made on affordable housing.
But I just wanted to know if when we're replacing these trees, placing these mature trees by other trees, making sure that they are of good size and not small saplings, so we lose them. That's obviously at a later stage to consider. But I'd be very interested to find out in future if that carries on. Thank you.
Are you happy with that, Jenna? Can we proceed? Okay. I've got a question, if I may, to Steve Varley, please. Steve, could the design of these houses be any better in this context, do you think? And if so, how?
Thank you, Chair. I think the first thing is, mind you, I have reflected, and I'm sure the applicants will say it's a drawing error, but such as, I'm trying to find the right page for them. There are the odd house here that's shown, oh yeah, the Pushkin 25 is an example. We've got nice heads and sills on the fronts, but they're missing off all the rest of the elevation. And I'm sure such a minor thing can be dealt with by the developer. The heads and sills on the others appear on some, the rendered ones. I'm sure we can go through it with the developer, conditioning the materials, for example, the brick colours and things like that. I'm sure we can pick them up. And as you've asked for images, we can see how those images are rendered to show it better. You know, I think the way these are drawn is not. If I were drawing them, I'd have done them differently, but I can talk to the developer. That's something we can pick up at conditions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see no more questions. Oh, yes, I do, Councillor Cohen. Would you? All right. OK, so we'll move to comments. So I'll take you first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Colleagues will know, it's not sound a bit like former councillor Peter Green. Colleagues will know that it is not easy to get a neighbourhood plan. The process with officers is incredibly difficult before they will sign off on it. The process of then getting residents to accept it is also not easy. And it's that reason that it is given exceptional weight. And I say that, Chair, because Mr. Newbury said there's nothing exceptional. Well, actually, something exceptional has happened here. In 2018, a local neighbourhood plan came into effect. And indeed, MPPF in its current iteration requires us to give that overriding weight. It is the ultimate statement of what the local community want in terms of their design. And it would seem to me, having listened incredibly carefully to the developer, that in terms of the density characteristic of this area, this is too dense. And I would urge, I really hope we will tell the developer, you need to go away and look at that aspect, number one. We're actually asked today to approve reserved matters, appearance, landscaping and layout. Well, as the chair has quite rightly said, we actually can't do that because the developer has failed to give us actual visuals of what the appearance, landscaping actually are going to really look like in terms of, we've got some plans, but that doesn't allow us to do our duty as planning councillors today to approve something because we can't see it. We've had other local, and in some cases not so local, estates with an acceptance that they might sort of look like that. But certainly I don't feel we're in any kind of position today to approve on that regard. We are, though, also asked to look at the scale of the site, because that is one of the reserved matters. And again, for me, the scale of this development, particularly taking into account the local neighbourhood plan, is in excess of what we ought to be accepting. This development is not sensitive to Collingham's heritage and history. It just isn't. And for me, there is a huge amount, not a huge amount of work, there is a piece of work to do. Actually, I don't think it's a huge amount of work. I don't think it's helpful, if I'm honest, when the developer says, we're not going to move on that point. Well, we've agreed it with officers. Well, there's a reason it's a plans panel. It's not going to be determined by officers. It's going to be determined by this panel. And the message I've been hearing, I might be calling it wrong, is that this panel feels there's a piece of work still to do to get this over the line. Absolutely, there needs to be development here. It is a site that's where the principle of development has been given permission. I don't think anyone's trying to resile from that. But we need to have the best possible development on every site that comes forward in this city, certainly of this scale. And I, frankly, don't care where it is, whether it's in Beeston or Hunslet or Collingham. We want the best possible development for every resident of this city. And this doesn't get to that threshold. It's not far. It's going to take a little bit more work. But for me, there's still work to do there. Finally, and I really appreciate the indulgence, the affordables is a real issue for me. 6 3-bedroom properties out of 45 isn't enough. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. I would agree with all of that. And the starting question I wrote down as we started to go through this was, is this the best we can do? It's not a question of whether this site is going to be developed or not. It is. That's not up for debate. But is it the best we can do? My instinct is no. The truth is, I don't think we have enough information to answer the question, because we can't see visually what the design and layout looks like, what the materials are going to look like, how the roofscapes are going to be, what the street scenes will be like, how people will actually live and feel as they move among it. So I just don't feel there's enough here to be able to say, my instinct is it's not there and there's work to do, but how can we answer based on what we've got in front of us? So my second point is, I have a strong view, which I'm really working hard in my own ward to ensure is exercised, that planning should be done with the community, not to it. And I do not accept that 2 parish council meetings 2.5 to 3 years ago in any way represents any kind of meaningful engagement with the community on this application. It clearly doesn't. And I'm disappointed that you tried to pull the wool over our eyes on that one. So I would be asking that the developers are instructed by this panel to go back and properly engage with the community. And I can give recent examples in my own ward of the Lovell scheme at home, the Homes England site in Thorpe Arch, similar size and scale, similar community, similar part of the city, very controversial site, similarly a SAP site, strong arguments against. Once it got to the reserved matter stage, despite the fact it took a lot of arm twisting and a threat of bringing it to plans panel, the developer did come and engage with the community, did resolve the issues, did work with the parish council, and ultimately it was able to be approved, not at plans panel, but under delegated powers. It can work. Similarly with the big scheme at Racecourse Approach in Wetherby, I think we've had maybe a dozen design workshops now with the community and the developer and planners, and we're making good progress on actually trying to make that the best it can be. It works, it gives better development. And if you ask the developers in both of those circumstances, they would say, actually, they're glad they've done it and it's better for them. They're getting better development at the end of it. So I would urge that we ask that this is done with the community, not to it. And the key points for me that need to be addressed, in addition to the ones that Councillor Cohen has mentioned, we need to see what the design is going to be like. I know from my experience with Miller Homes in Boston Spa at Grove Road, they were not easy to work with. It was like dragging teeth to get things done that were conditioned, and I hope that we reflect on those things and make sure we're really robust in the language in the agreements. The density is too high. Bungalows across the city are crucial, and on this site it has to happen. They have to find a way to make it work. Councillor Nash has suggested a possible way of dealing with that by actually making putting some 3-story properties. I think that's a sensible possibility. And then I would like to see more detail of how the green space can be made accessible and usable to the community.
Councillor Anderson.
Quick, because I endorse everything's been said. The only additional comments I'd make is Mr. Platten, the reference to Cookridge site, that came about because of us working together. Everybody knows how awkward I am. Ryan and I worked tirelessly to get a solution to that, and we did at the end of the day, so much so that I asked if it didn't even have to come to plans panel for approval, because I was satisfied that everybody had done everything they could and the community had got something. Planning conditions, a lot's being referred today, this is going to be covered by planning conditions. Experience tells me that's the most painful thing in trying to satisfy the planning conditions, and unless we maybe get a bit more detail, leaving it to chance that the planning conditions is just a stage too far, I'd like to see more. So on that basis, I would like to move that we just defer this for further information.
Well, thank you for that, and that's noted, but I do see that Councillor Cohn wants to come back.
So sorry, Chair. I wrote something in great big capital letters and I got so carried away I didn't say it. But it very much ties in actually to the slides we were shown. Something the officer said, and indeed one of the issues about trying to reflect Collingham, and I feel ridiculous almost saying this because I'm about to channel my inner Councillor Latty. We need chimneys. This site, it needs to reflect that roofscape, and colleagues that sit with me in City will know that I never say that, but in this instance it really does. This estate, it needs to have the chimney roofscapes, otherwise it's going to look odd.
May I just comment on that final point you've made about knowing Councillor Latty as you do, actually his point isn't so much about chimneys, it is more about the form and substance of the roof line. And chimneys haven't been used in domestic houses for quite some time for the purposes of emitting smoke. So perhaps we could think about something in broader terms, but I totally get your point. Councillor Nash.
Yes, I've served on plans panels for quite some while now. And of course, I do know if we get a planning application, you have to decide on what is in front of you. You can't say, oh, we don't want this 4-bedroomed house. We want a 2-bedroom bungalow. Of course, you can't do that. But I do take exception to an outline application which shows that bungalows, which raises everybody's expectation that bungalows are going to be built. And then we're told, oh, well, although it was in the plans for the outline permission, that was not a condition of the outline permission. I don't think that is good enough because it may have persuaded the inspector, even though he may not have considered bungalows. Yes, this looks like a nice scheme, and therefore I haven't got that problem. So I would like to second the motion that it is deferred and that it comes back to the panel with the tweaking, which it seems to me many of the members require.
Well, I've had a proposal and a seconder, and would anybody else like to contribute at this point in terms of what you'd like to see coming back? Yes, Nicole, Councillor Sharp.
Thanks, Chair. Also a look at informal play in the green space.
I would have added that in anyway. Green space and play. So would you like to summarise what we've said so far, David, and then there may be other things to add in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The things that I've got on my notes for further negotiations in respect of the layout in terms of density and housing for the elderly, particularly in respect of provision of bungalows. More illustrative material, including CGIs, and maybe more information in respect to them. Well, we'll get that through CGIs to help members better understand the proposal. To look at the neighbourhood plan and whether further changes can be made to reflect the local character. And as part of that, we would look at the general roofscape as well. In terms of public open space, there's information in terms of a concept plan for access into the open space, how it's going to be usable, and also in respect of provision for informal play. More information in terms of affordable housing. Have we got the correct mix on that? Information also, sorry, going back to the public open space about how we prevent unauthorized access onto that space. And the final point that I've got noted down here is in respect of engagement with the local community. I'm bound to ask this question because a couple of members have mentioned it, and the developer no doubt would have pricked up their ears when this was mentioned, but it was mentioned a couple of times by councillors that actually managed to defer and delegate, as it were, once they got ward member agreement to a particular scheme.
Yes.
Rather than bringing it back to plans panel. And the way that I think we would normally work that is if the ward members contend with the changes that have been made, we'd normally discuss that with the chair and make a decision whether it's to come back to plans panel or not. But I did note that Councillor Nash has also asked for it to come back to plans panel. So I'd just like some clarity on that point from members, if that's okay.
Yeah, I know you indicated first, but I will take Councillor Nash if that's all right first, and then come back to you, Councillor Cohen.
I'm quite happy if ward members are satisfied with the final scheme, not to have to sit here for 2.5 hours discussing the matter again. So I'm quite happy if it is ward member approval. There was just one further point that consideration be made to increasing the size of the affordable housing, the 3rd story bedroom.
Thank you. Councillor Cohen, you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, just if I may, Ms. Newbury, I think that the point around the affordables wasn't per se a question as to whether it was the right mix. I think our view, myself and Councillor Almond's view, was that it wasn't the right mix. There weren't sufficient 3 beds. So I would like that slightly stronger with respect than we're asking the question. I think the view of this panel is it's not a sufficient mix. Thank you.
Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. I think the key to it is going to come down to what form the community engagement takes. Like Councillor Nash, I've no issue at all in saying we defer and delegate effectively to ward members and the parish council. But I've fallen foul of this before, where there's been an agreement that the developer is to go away and consult, but that consultation doesn't become anything meaningful. So I don't know if there's a way we can capture that. Actually, there needs to be, what we found is where you get some serious design workshops where you have the planners, the community, ward members, parish council, developers sat around the table and try and thrash out the issues. That's how you make real progress with it. And if the developers aren't willing, then it's going to come back here anyway. And I don't think we take.
If the ward members aren't satisfied, it will come back here. Yeah. Okay. Are we okay? So can I take that motion that's been proposed then, please? Could you just read out the wording of it, please, David?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think we're in a position that members are defer and delegating approval of the application, subject to consultation with ward members having the right to ask the application to come back to plans panel if they're not satisfied. And we will look at more illustrative material in terms of CGIs, look at the neighbourhood plan. Is there further changes that we can make there, including roofscape? Look at the open spaces concept plan, access into those for and use of informal play, affordable housing, more 3-bed units, proposals to prevent unauthorised access to public open space, engagement with the local community, and we'll pick up in terms of the more 3 beds, the point that Councillor Nash has raised in respect to increasing the height of the affordable housing, explore that as an option.
So if that's the proposal, I'd like to ask for all those in favour of it, please. Thank you. Those against? Abstentions? I think that was unanimous, Debbie. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Can I thank you all? It has been a longer meeting than we've been used to recently, so thank you for your patience and thank you for your rigour. See you next time.